Martha had always prided herself on her perfect life. Her marriage to Richard was the cornerstone of her existence. They had built a home together, filled it with laughter and memories, but beneath the surface cracks began to form unnoticed. At first Martha found herself growing restless in their predictable routine. While Richard immersed himself in his demanding career, she sought solace elsewhere. Initially harmless conversations with Daniel, her colleague, turned into shared lunches, then after work drinks, until one evening when the office party spilled into an empty conference room and a single kiss changed everything. From that moment Martha felt torn between guilt and excitement. As she navigated this new secret world, keeping her double life hidden became a delicate balancing act requiring lies and careful planning. Yet each encounter with Daniel intensified her emotions, making it harder to return to the man she once loved deeply. Richard remained oblivious, caught up in his own pressures and deadlines. He trusted Martha completely, which only deepened her shame, but the thrill of deception pulled her further away from him and closer to Daniel, whose attentiveness and passion awakened something long buried within her. Even as she questioned what she was doing to the family she cherished, Martha's heart pounded each time she heard Richard's car pull into the driveway, a mixture of fear and guilt clawing at her chest. She would rush to tidy up any evidence of her secret life, ensuring every trace of Daniel was erased from her phone, her clothes, even her scent. Yet, as Richard walked through the door with that familiar smile, Martha felt a pang of love for the man she had vowed to cherish forever. It confused her, this duality of emotion. How could she want both? One night, after another long day at work, Martha found herself sitting across from Daniel in a dimly lit cafe. The rain tapped softly against the windows, creating an intimate atmosphere that seemed almost too perfect. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "We can't keep doing this," he whispered, his voice laced with sincerity. "I don't want to hurt you or him." But Martha shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "Don't say that," she pleaded. "Don't take this away from me." As days turned into weeks, the tension in her household grew palpable. Richard began noticing small things: the way Martha avoided eye contact during dinner, the faint smell of cologne on her jacket that wasn't his own, the late nights she claimed were spent working but left her exhausted and distant. His questions became more frequent, his tone sharper, though Martha always managed to deflect them with practiced ease. Still, the weight of her deception pressed heavily on her shoulders. Then came the day when everything unraveled. Richard returned home early from a business trip, expecting to surprise Martha. Instead, he walked in on her speaking animatedly on the phone, her voice light and carefree, a stark contrast to the strained woman he had grown accustomed to seeing lately. When she saw him standing there, her face went pale, and the phone slipped from her trembling hands. For a moment neither of them spoke, the silence heavy with betrayal and disbelief. "Who is he?" Richard finally asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside him. Martha opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her silence was answer enough. Richard's voice broke as he repeated the question, softer this time, almost pleading for her to deny it. But Martha couldn't find the strength to lie anymore. The dam of secrets burst open, and she confessed everything: the meetings, the lies, the betrayals. Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into both their hearts. Richard listened, his face a mask of pain and disbelief, but when she mentioned Daniel's name, something in him snapped. He stormed out of the house without another word, slamming the door behind him. Martha collapsed onto the couch, her body racked with sobs. She had shattered the life they had built together, destroyed the trust that was the foundation of their marriage. Yet, even as guilt consumed her, a part of her wondered if she could ever go back to the person she used to be. Daniel called later that evening, unaware of what had transpired. His voice was warm, concerned, asking how she was doing. For a moment, Martha hesitated, tempted to lean into the comfort he offered. But then she thought of Richard's devastated expression, the way his eyes had lost their light, and she knew she couldn't continue down this path. "We need to stop," she said abruptly, her voice trembling. Daniel protested, arguing that they could work through whatever challenges lay ahead, but Martha was resolute. "It's over," she insisted before hanging up. The days that followed were some of the hardest Martha had ever endured. Richard returned home after a few days, his demeanor cold and distant. They barely spoke, each meal heavy with unspoken accusations and regrets. Martha tried to make amends, reaching out to him with tentative gestures, a cooked dinner, a heartfelt apology. But Richard remained closed off, his heart too wounded to accept her efforts. Meanwhile, Daniel attempted to reach out several times, but Martha ignored his calls and texts. She realized now that her affair hadn't been about love or passion, it had been about filling a void she hadn't understood until it was too late. And while Daniel might have provided temporary relief, he could never replace the history, the connection, the depth she shared with Richard. But rebuilding trust would not be easy. Every glance, every word between them carried the weight of betrayal. Martha knew she had to prove herself worthy of forgiveness, if such a thing was even possible. As she sat alone one evening, staring at the empty chair across from her where Richard usually sat, she vowed to fight for their marriage, to show him, through actions rather than words, that she still loved him and wanted to reclaim what they had lost. But whether Richard would ever fully forgive her remained uncertain. Richard's silence became a constant presence in their home, a tangible reminder of the chasm that now separated them. He spent most of his time at work, or holed up in the study, avoiding her whenever possible. Martha felt the weight of his absence keenly, as though an invisible wall had been erected between them, one she couldn't seem to scale no matter how hard she tried. One evening, unable to bear the suffocating atmosphere any longer, Martha decided to take matters into her own hands. She prepared Richard's favorite meal, a dish he hadn't requested in months, and set the table with their best china and candles. When he finally emerged from the study, looking surprised and slightly wary, she offered him a small smile. "I thought we could talk," she said softly, gesturing for him to sit. At first, Richard resisted, his body language stiff and guarded. But as the night wore on, something shifted. Perhaps it was the flickering candlelight, or the familiar taste of the food they'd shared so many times before, but Richard began to open up. His words were measured, careful, but they carried a depth of emotion Martha hadn't expected. "Do you remember why we got married?" he asked suddenly, his voice tinged with nostalgia. Martha froze, caught off guard by the question. For a moment, guilt threatened to overwhelm her, but then she remembered the early mornings spent laughing over coffee, the late-night conversations about dreams and fears, the way they had supported each other through life's challenges. "Yes," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I do." Encouraged by her response, Richard continued. He spoke of their past, of the moments that had defined their relationship, and of the future they had once envisioned together. It wasn't easy. There were pauses where anger bubbled beneath the surface, and moments when both of them faltered under the weight of what had happened. But slowly, hesitantly, they began to reconnect. The following weeks were difficult, filled with fits and starts as they navigated the complexities of rebuilding trust. Richard attended counseling sessions, initially reluctant but eventually finding solace in the safe space it provided. Martha joined him, determined to confront her actions and understand the root of her dissatisfaction. Through these sessions, she learned more about herself, about the insecurities and unmet needs that had driven her toward Daniel, and vowed to address them openly with Richard. Their journey wasn't linear. There were days when progress seemed impossible, when old wounds resurfaced and tempers flared. Yet, amidst the pain, there were also glimpses of hope. A shared laugh over dinner, a brief moment of tenderness, a quiet acknowledgement that they still cared deeply for each other, all served as reminders of the bond they shared. As autumn gave way to winter, Martha noticed subtle changes in Richard. The walls he had built around himself began to crumble, replaced by a cautious willingness to engage with her again. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fire, he took her hand in his touch gentle yet firm. "I don't know if I can ever forget what happened," he admitted, his voice raw with vulnerability. "But I think I might be ready to forgive." Martha's heart swelled with gratitude, though she knew the road ahead would remain challenging. Forgiveness was only the beginning. Healing would require patience, effort, and unwavering commitment from both of them. Still, for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope, to believe that their love, though battered, could endure. And as they sat together in the warmth of their home, surrounded by memories both painful and precious, Martha realized that sometimes, even the deepest fractures can become opportunities for growth, if two people are willing to fight for what truly matters. Martha and Richard's journey toward healing had only just begun, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a fragile sense of possibility in the air. Their love, though tested and scarred, still flickered like the embers of a dying fire, waiting to be fanned back to life. As they sat together that evening, neither spoke of the future, nor did they dwell on the past. Instead, they simply existed in the present moment, holding on to each other with a quiet determination. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, they both knew one thing for certain: they were in it together.